older Portuguese men oblivious to the gentrification, young homeowners repulsed by the Chinese garbage pickers, first dates, secret meetings, breakups, blowouts, joggers, dogs, frisbees. The hot, cold summer persisted into early September, and now everything is out of time, like the gray-haired woman and her schoolboy lover smoking a joint behind a tennis court. Participation. We participate in making the very structures that make us. This is trivially true. Article 1 of the critical theory constitution, and is at once a psychological, a political, and an aesthetic principle. Things not only don't work without our participation, they don't exist. And this means that we cannot help but participate. The neurotic participates in the making of his mother. The citizen produces state ideology. The spectator sutures the film's meaning. This isn't to suggest that the real mother, the real state, the real film don't exert their own force on us. They do, and we have the bruises to show for it. Only that we cannot locate where we begin and where the other ends, where a dog in one frame chases a ball in another. There's been a lot of talk lately about non-participation, about withdrawal, retreat, shut-ins, dropouts, about Bartleby. I'd prefer not to, he said. Neither ostrich nor trickster, the non-participant occupies space without demanding anything, like the homeless men scattered about the park, reading their books. The green of the grass looks greener than usual, or maybe it's the uneven quality of the light, or the cameras, or the schizophrenic shadows cast by the overleafed trees. My eyes are bothering me, she said. I see only in Crayola, the 64 box. Spring green, pine green, blue green, sea green. They're just pigment and paraffin, referenceless names. Forest green is not forest green. Forest green is forest green because it's not olive green. Truth split from the object. But you know where this breakdown breaks down, she said? Where? Over there, out of the frames. A group of men are practicing martial arts. They stand in formation with starched white uniforms, their collars trimmed to match their belt colors, green, red, black. Side kick, front kick, round kick. The group yells the name of the kick and it executes it at the same time. Low defense, high defense, knife hand defense. The techniques are stuffed with their names. The names are the techniques. It's impossible to recognize the practical application of the technique. Fold, strike, recoil. Fold, strike, recoil. This is as close as you get to the point at which language merges with the thing itself. And to merge fully is to break down wholly. There was a study conducted of newly diagnosed patients of terminal illnesses. It revealed that survival rates are exactly the same for the hopeful as they are for the hopeless. As for the non-hopeful, the study had no answer. There are no criteria for the non-hopeful. Everything is still measured in degrees of hope and hopelessness, despite the repeated lesson that such affects are what keep us repeating. The quantum leap to a different order of things, like a new form of emotional investment, like a new biological or political economic structure, like a new form of participation, never comes when it seems to make the most sense. It comes, rather, from out of space, or more precisely, from the dead center of the blind spot. wonder about the anatomical blind spot, that place where the optic nerve passes through the optic disc, rendering a part of the visual field imperceptible. Or more practically, that place about a foot away where, when you cover your right eye and look at the cross with your left, the circle disappears. Our other eye and brain fill in the blind spot, so we see it all. Like an octopus whose nerve fibers do not disrupt the retina. Like the police whose cameras surveil the park. I wonder if we might evolve in such a way so that we don't fill in the blind spot, but subtract it out. So that we don't eliminate it, but expand it. Picture this: 4 cameras, each facing in a different 90-degree direction, each on the same automated head, itself on the same tripod, panning, slowly, smoothly, approximately one 360-degree circle every 10 minutes. The focal lengths of the lenses are almost the same, so when viewing all 4 channels at the same time, in 4 quadrants, some in focus, some not, a panorama is rendered. The one with blind spots. What's happening in those blind spots? Wouldn't you like to know? Okay, I'll tell you. Right at the place where the couple, or the collective, or the individual is swallowed up by the blind spot, that's where our fantasies are coming true. Where all of the cradle-to-grave protection is. It's where the cure is, it's where enlightenment is too, it's where all of the perfect sex is, not to mention where the revolution is taking place. And when the couple, or the collective, or the individual re-emerge in the next frame, they do so in a state of repose, before being consumed by the next blind spot, in which, yes, they go for broke again. I'd like to make that film someday. For now, we're watching this film. A few things are on the move. Participation and withdrawal. The park, the city, not to mention the blind spot, which is still as inscrutable as a 3-legged dog. The 3 of them are walking again, circling back in the direction of the tennis courts. A man, dressed in a white-collared shirt, blue jeans, and a white baseball hat, is practicing his strokes without a racket or balls. The man's alone. He looks to be in his early 50s. The man seems to be playing out a point with rigorous precision and a rehearsed quality down to the smallest detail, such as how he shakes his head, how he mouths words like, "No, come on." He's spending most of the time on the baseline waiting for the ball to return before hitting it back. There's a 5-second interval between the time the man performs one stroke and the time it takes to perform another. All the while, he bounces, he finches his head following the immaterial moves of an immaterial opponent. The man does not break. He continues playing the same point. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. At 15 minutes, the rally is at 300 strokes, with no end in sight. A man and a woman, a couple, if that's what they are, and their 2 dogs are sitting on the oversaturated grass, listening and looking at the musicians, and not. About 10 minutes earlier, the musicians passed, from left to right, a dispenser of packing tape. Each player ripped off a piece of tape, and then used it to secure some kind of musical score to their left thigh. No staffs, no clefs, no measures, just a grid filled with notes. The musician on the far left waved his right arm, and the group, if that's what they are, began to play. A quarter through the piece, a string snapped on the player's guitar, sitting 1 seat from the far right, the 10th musician, if counting from the left. Number 10 handed his broken string guitar to the person sitting to his right. Number 9, who in turn gave his instrument to number 10. Number 9 then gave the broken string guitar to number 8, who gave his guitar to number 9. Number 8 then exchanged instruments with number 7, who gave his instrument, a parlor guitar, to number 8, while number 6 took the broken string guitar and gave her banjo to number 7, before passing number 10's guitar to number 5. And this procedure, practiced and unpracticed, straight and queer, continued all the way down the row until the broken string guitar was finally in the hands of number 1. Relay occurred without disrupting the flow of the piece, even though disruption and flow do not matter to this piece.
Hey! Sorry, it's a girl.
Number 1 began restraining the guitar by placing the instrument on his lap.
It's actually quite fast.
7 theses on participation. Thesis 1. Participation is celebrated as the political category that breaks down binaries: ruler-ruled, teacher-student, boss-worker. But today, the facile discourse around participation functions to obscure and legitimate the unequal roles that subjects are structurally forced to play within the social formation. Radical participation cannot exist within a capitalist system based on a logic of inequality. Thesis 2. Participation is celebrated as an aesthetic category that evacuates the artist-spectator relationship and that mobilizes a collective of actors, both amateur and professional, staged and unstaged, to collaborate in the production of socially engaged art. But the anything can happen aspiration of participatory art is too readily commodified by consumer capitalism. Thus, reproducing the seemingly irreproducible, mass-producing the seemingly singular, and containing the seemingly uncontainable. Today, we are asked to buy tickets in advance to the happening. Participatory art inexorably leads to poorly argued diatribes in the commentary sections of various media. Thesis 3. Withdrawal is celebrated as the political category that rejects the dominant social bonds that function to reproduce social inequality. But today, the withdrawal of others is welcomed by those in power, since those in power cannot be chased and threatened by those in withdrawal, while those in power can continue to extract surplus value from those in withdrawal by way of internet user fees. Thesis 4. Autonomy is celebrated as the aesthetic category that rejects the market and intervenes by way of formalist experimentation. But today, autonomous art is quickly canonized in the effete university seminar, or elegantly imprisoned in the minimalist gallery. Thesis 5. The university is no longer the place where scholars participate in a critical project and train an emerging intellectual class. Thesis 6. The 5 aforementioned theses are vulgar. Thesis 7. At the current vulgar moment, vulgar theoretical interventions are more effective than refined ones. Have you ever seen a magician link and unlink rings, he asked her. Yes. Do you know how it's done? I guess there's some sort of space in between the rings. No. There's a space in between only one of the rings. The rest of the rings are solid. The magician always holds the trick ring in his right hand, covering the opening with his thumb and forefinger. This one opening can then produce elaborate configurations, 5 or 10 linked rings in the shape of pyramids, diamonds. I once saw a magician perform the linking rings in the most unbelievable way, he said. The magician began by showing the space of the short-circled ring. He began by revealing the trick. What's so unbelievable about that? It's that it didn't matter. The knowledge of how the trick worked didn't seem to make a difference. It was still impressive to watch. And the magician was still able to mobilize the place in us that really wants to believe in magic. Or at least the place in us that really wants to believe in the impossible. But now, it's all possible, she said. Everything is in view, surveilled from top to bottom. Competence is our only ideal, and yet competence, like craft and intelligence, is not enough. After tightening the new string and fitting it flush in the nut and bridge slots, number one began to tune the guitar by holding it close to his ear so as to not disturb the other players or the continuity of the piece, or the logic of the group, if that's what they are. At that point, number one reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a pair of wire cutters, cut the end of the new string, and handed the instrument to number two, who handed his mandolin back to number one. Number two then passed the restrung guitar to number three, who gave back to number two his original banjo. Number three then passed the guitar to number four, as number four passed back to number three his original mandolin. And then number four passed the restrung guitar to number five, and the circuit, the choreography, the ritual, the idiosyncrasy, the gag, the detail, the absurdity, the memory, the bond, the non-instrumental passing of instruments continued from member to member until the restrung guitar was finally back in the hands of its original player, number 10. Without losing their place, even though there was no loss in this composition, the group continued to play right on time, even though there was no time in this composition. I witnessed this event, or one like it, in Japan in 1988. I was living in a small town, and a university mandolin orchestra traveled through to give a performance. I remember experiencing the strings snapping and the musicians passing the instrument down the line, and then the member on the far left restringing the mandolin before passing it back. All the while the piece continued. I think it was a Bach fugue, and it killed me. I remember musician number one, the restringer, taking his time, slow and smooth, and I projected onto him a fantasy that he was the youngest member of the group, and that this was his responsibility to restring, the most menial and arduous, but the most critical task. This was the way that the group integrates new members into the collective. They give the neophyte the most decisive role, and if he or she cracks, so does the collective. Or maybe they had never executed this procedure before. It was spontaneous, never to occur again, only to remain an obsessive memory, a story that I insist on retelling, signifying, fetishizing, spoiling. Enough's enough, I decided to restage it. So using this talk, the invitation by Dana, by Jonathan, as a pretense, I gathered friends and acquaintances that could play various string instruments, and another friend, a composer, wrote the piece, and he called it Mandolin. Mandolin requires a minimum of 6 musicians playing plucked stringed instruments. I don't fully understand the logic of the piece, but what I do get is that each player is given instructions to be referred to while playing. The instructions contain 100 lettered notes, the musical key in which each musician is to play, and a beginning point, something like count up, start on string number 2. Each player moves at his or her own pace, and the different abilities of the players are what render the singular version of the composition. The piece would not be very interesting if all of the members played at the same pace, if all, for example, were virtuosic, or if there was a pre-established hierarchy. But why repeat this? Why tear it out of Japan? Why put it in a public park in the city with a variety of instruments? And why shoot it with multiple cameras? And why mix it with 1,000 other scenes happening at the same time? Such as this scene. There's a Victorian duplex on the other side of the park, industrialized and medicalized with all of the appropriate safety rails and lower drinking fountains. This facility has become famous for certain experiments dealing with dementia and fantasy. Instead of dispelling the debilitating desires and the cracked memories, the doctors play them out. If a woman is obsessed with going to the park to hear her daughter sing in the local choir, the staff accompany her to the park, even though there is no local choir, and even though the woman does not have a daughter. They walk around in red and white shirts, not knowing who is following whom, or whose impossible desire is being followed. I used to work there, she said. How was that? Remarkable and unremarkable. Rather than being taught that their fantasies are fantasies, the patients are encouraged to follow them. It's all physical. The wearing activity of pursuing the broken lead is enlivening. It's the body. But there was something that bothered me. The staff decided not to tell the patients about the state of the world. They figured it didn't matter and would only complicate things. I hated this. Here comes my favorite part of the film. It's this guy on the bike in the top left frame. Now he's riding straight toward the cameras. He rides into the bottom right frame and then emerges in the bottom left frame. He looks at the musicians. What's going on here? Where can I set up my picnic and prepare for my blind date? And then he turns around and he comes back toward me. And then he's eaten up by the machine, right on cue. Even though there was no cue, he's free, liberated from space and from time, or at least liberated from the dominant regimes of space and time. Lucky him, lucky us. But we can only hold the blind spot for so long before our cyclist is squeezed out of the machine like a plastic toy. And then he rides off, only to return to the top left frame, which is actually not north, but west. And there, he proceeds to chat up our favorite chance actor. Now we're back to the scene with the two women, one in red, the other in white, both of whom have just entered the zone. So you quit the experiment, she asked. No, I was fired. For sexual misconduct. Bathing was central to the home's principles. Instead of spending energy trying to drive away the confusions of the mind, they believed that we should focus on pleasing the body. A few times a day, women and men would take baths separately. I would bathe with the women, she said, everyone washing each other's bodies in warm-watered pools, in circles, in squares. There was one woman who really took to the baths. She experienced real pleasure after years of banging her dementia against the wall of impotent doctors and incapable family. She liked me and liked to clean my back. One day while in the bath, sitting behind me with her sponge, the woman started to kiss my neck, midnight kisses. She then snuck her arm underneath mine and began rubbing my belly. Small circles with the hand in one direction, smaller circles with the fingers in the other. How's that even possible? She then dropped her hand and, with an inevitability, inserted two of her fingers into my vagina. One finger moving in one direction, the other in the other. How's that even possible? They fired me that day. Did you protest? Yes, she said. I explained that by focusing on her pleasure, I was behaving in perfect coordination with the facility's principals. But they insisted that it wasn't the woman's pleasure that was the problem. It was mine, my pleasure. My fingers in her is cutting-edge medicine. Her fingers in me is criminal grounds for dismissal. Perhaps this is how to understand the political today. That the relationship between the ruler and the ruled is organized not just around unequal power relations, but also unequal pleasure relations, both enforced by the police. The point is not to manage the situation, to hope to make equal the ruler and the ruled, the student and the teacher, the doctor and the patient, the artist and the spectator, the bather and the bathed, but to understand that politics itself is about holding their internal disagreement, as Jacques Rancière would have it. And here we might stay with Rancière and remember how he distinguished between politics and the police. Whereas the police say that there is nothing to see on the road, nothing to do but move along. Politics, in contrast, consists in transforming this space of moving along into a space for the appearance for that which has no reason to be. Or to stay with our film, we can argue that the politics of film, all film, is not to move along with it, with the narrative, with the panning, the camera work, but to transform this space of moving along into a space for the appearance of a competing film, a film inside the film, films inside the film. To pursue the blind spot is not to expose what is hidden or what we cannot see, but it is to pursue a competing world. The blind spot is another world. It is nothing other than a radically different future, always inside our present. And the point isn't to uncover it, I think, or to repress it, or to bargain with it, or to bow down to it, or to theorize it, or to murder it, but to have it, the blind spot, wipe away all that isn't in the blind spot, the non-blind spot, so that the machine can squeeze out not another gumball, but another world, one that might seem indistinguishable from our present one, but in all of the delicate and indelicate ways that matter, is not. Around the 29-minute mark of the tennis point and of this film, and after 642 shots, 321 by the man, and 321 by the absent present, he simulated an approach shot, made his way to the net, waited as he aligned for an overhead that he successfully smashed, before collapsing to the ground and holding both his thighs as if suffering from horrible cramps. Or maybe he was suffering from horrible cramps. Fictions have real consequences, just as tragedies have farcical endings. Now the man was up on his feet and limping. That was spectacular, the woman who had been watching the whole point yelled to the man as she with her two friends walked onto the court and toward him. "Thank you," he said. 1984. Nelson versus Hepner. The longest tennis point ever played in a professional match. 643 shots, 29 minutes, the man said. How do you know that, she asked. How do I know what, the man said. How do you know that it was 643 shots? After realizing earlier in the match that both players were committed to hitting lobs from the baseline, a journalist who was present started counting each shot by hand, the number of strokes. 4 tally marks slashed by a diagonal, clusters of picket-fenced fives, uni-airy, the way we used to count before we filmed everything. Oh, and I was there, the man said. You were there? Yes, it was excruciating. The most traumatic experience of my life. It destroyed me. All I'm capable of doing now is repeating the point as faithfully as possible. And the players, she asked? The point ended their careers, the man said. I mean, after being so connected to another person, How can you possibly play with anyone else? How can you love anyone else? That was a freak connection. The point went on for so long not because they were playing it safe, or trying to set a record, or even trying to win. It was because they were connected in some ineffable way. They might have been connected, she said, but there was just as much of a chance that another pair of players would have played to 644 shots. Then why hasn't this happened? It has, she said. The moment you can consider it is the moment that it's already happened. Were those real cramps or simulated ones? She asked. I'm not sure, the man said. Either way, I need to walk them off. We listen and we watch. Two activities that go together, but not perfectly. Not perfectly like the end piece of the cut guitar string that simultaneously unwinds and jumps off of number one's lap to end up on the grass in front of the 11 players. The curled string end, made of a core of fine nylon filaments wound with silver-plated bronze, lay still and spotlit from the quarter moon, reflected off of the skyscrapers to the east. And then a squirrel, a white squirrel, moves toward the string. Squirrely and paranoid. This is what we call a human that acts like a squirrel. What do we call a squirrel that acts like a squirrel? Recessive-gened and pink-eyed, the white squirrel sniffs the string and jabs at it with its front feet. The string's bouncy responses intrigue the squirrel, and it begins to shuffle-kick the string back and forth from side to side, from one side of the musicians to the other, back and forth, left and right, east and west, depending on your perspective. Swinging their eyes and necks, the 11 players track the squirrel from side to side. So do the couples and the individuals and the collectives still in the park, whose eyes and necks move in the opposite same direction as the musicians. The music continues, speeded up, slowed down, straightened, turned around, and remaining the same, always in its place. A thread from the string end lodges itself into the squirrel's right foot pad. The squirrel tries to shake it out, but can't. The squirrel starts to spin tight circles, one after another, around and around, with the string end whipping through the air like a propeller. The numbers add up the turns, turning over like digital clock displays. The musicians stop playing. They stare at the spinning squirrel and start counting the turns, to themselves, then out loud. And the rest of the people in the park, the ones placed there and the ones replacing them, also begin to count, to themselves, then out loud.